Michelle Johnson was 43 years old when her husband of 7 years poured a glass of Chateau Margaux down her red hair at the Westmont Grand Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. And the hundreds of corporate executives watching the $800 million deal signing had no idea they were witnessing a woman who owned the very company making the acquisition. She stood there in a simple navy dress from Macy's, wine streaming down her face and soaking into the fabric, while her husband, Lewis, sharp in a custom suit worth $4,200, laughed openly with his mistress, Vanessa Clark, who wore an emerald Versace gown worth $8,900. The contract on the marble table between them represented the largest private equity deal Northbridge Holdings had executed that year, the achievement Lewis had been bragging about for 18 months as his historic victory. His salary as lead dealmaker at Meridian West Capital was $340,000 annually, plus performance bonuses that would bring him another $6.7 million from this transaction alone. Vanessa, his rising star analyst and very public lover, stood to collect $14 million in stock options. "Lighten up, Michelle," Vanessa said, not bothering to lower her voice as cameras flashed around them. "The adults are celebrating a real accomplishment here. Maybe you should go freshen up in the ladies' room." The laughter rippled through the crystal ballroom. Michelle recognized the faces. Board members from 3 Fortune 500 companies, investment bankers from Morgan Stanley who'd structured the financing, Lewis's entire executive team from Meridian West. They'd all watched Vanessa deliberately lift that wine glass and pour. They all saw Michelle's plain dress, her Target flats worth $34, her lack of jewelry beyond a simple wedding band. They saw exactly what Lewis wanted them to see: the forgettable wife who didn't belong in this world of private jets and 8-figure paydays. What none of them knew, what Lewis had been too busy chasing Vanessa and corner offices to notice, was that Michelle Johnson wasn't the quiet project manager earning $72,000 a year that he introduced her as. She was the majority owner of Northbridge Holdings, the $3.4 billion private investment group that was acquiring Meridian's target company. And the contract Lewis was signing with such pride, the deal he'd celebrated as his crowning achievement, was going to cost him and Vanessa everything they thought they'd won. But Michelle wasn't ready to reveal that yet. Not here, not now. She'd been preparing for this exact moment for 18 months, ever since the night she'd overheard Lewis and Vanessa on a rooftop terrace, half drunk on champagne, laughing about how they'd divorce Michelle right after his deal closed and take half her tiny savings before she knew what hit her. "You're right," Michelle said quietly, accepting a cloth napkin from a server. "I'm sorry. I'll just wait outside until you're finished." "Don't bother waiting," Lewis said, barely glancing at her as he shook hands with Northbridge's chairman. "This celebration is going to run late. Take an Uber back to the house. I'll be home whenever." Michelle nodded, playing the part perfectly, the part she'd been playing for 7 years, while Lewis climbed his ladder and forgot about the woman who'd quietly ensured every door opened for him. She walked out of the crystal ballroom with wine staining her hair and humiliation burning in her chest. Exactly the image Lewis and Vanessa wanted 300 people to remember. What they didn't see was the text message Michelle sent from her phone as she stepped into the elevator. Phase 2 confirmed. Execute the Northbridge loyalty provision. The recipient was Kendra Cook, the $980 an hour attorney who'd been working on Michelle's behalf for 14 months and who happened to be Northbridge Holdings' chief legal counsel. The Northbridge loyalty provision was something buried on page 713 of the 922-page merger agreement Lewis had just signed. It was a clause Lewis's own attorneys had approved without question, never imagining it would apply to him. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded stories and devastating power reversals, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new stories here every day, and tell me where you're watching from. I reply to every comment. The story of how Michelle Johnson became the invisible owner of a $3.4 billion investment empire started 23 years earlier on the south side of Chicago, with a girl who learned early that being overlooked was sometimes the greatest advantage of all. Michelle Johnson grew up in a cramped two-bedroom apartment on East 71st Street in Chicago's South Side, where her mother worked double shifts at a diner on Stony Island Avenue, and her father was nothing but an empty chair at the dinner table. He'd left when Michelle was 4, taking whatever dreams her mother had with him, leaving behind only bills and a daughter who learned early to make herself small. Numbers became Michelle's escape. While other kids played outside, she sat at the kitchen table calculating grocery budgets, figuring out how to stretch $140 into 2 weeks of meals, teaching herself compound interest from library books because she understood instinctively that money was the only reliable thing in an unreliable world. Her high school guidance counselor noticed her perfect math scores and pushed her toward a scholarship application for Northwestern University. Michelle won a full ride with a letter of recommendation that called her brilliant but invisible, the kind of student who solves problems quietly while others take credit. At Northwestern's business school, Michelle studied finance with an intensity that intimidated her classmates. She didn't go to parties or join sororities. She worked 2 part-time jobs, attended every lecture, and graduated summa cum laude with 0 debt and 0 social life. But she did secure a summer internship at Whitmore & Associates, a boutique investment firm in downtown Chicago that managed money for old wealth families who valued discretion over flash. That's where she met Rosemarie Carter. Rosemarie was 73 years old, legendary in private equity circles, and utterly unimpressive to look at. She wore sensible shoes and outdated suits and carried her lunch in Tupperware containers. Most people assumed she was someone's secretary. In reality, she controlled $2.1 billion across 17 shell corporations and blind trusts that even the SEC had trouble tracking. She noticed Michelle during the intern orientation, watching the young woman solve a market analysis problem in half the time it took the Harvard MBA sitting next to her. "Walk with me," Rosemarie said after the session, not waiting for Michelle to agree. They walked through Millennium Park, while Rosemarie asked questions that had nothing to do with finance: where Michelle grew up, what her mother did, whether she'd ever had something and lost it, whether she understood the difference between being poor and being invisible. "The world teaches women like us to apologize for taking up space," Rosemarie said, feeding pigeons by the fountain. "But invisibility is power, Michelle. When people underestimate you, they show you exactly who they are. They reveal their strategies, their weaknesses, their true intentions, and then you destroy them with information they handed you themselves." That conversation changed Michelle's life. Over the next 8 years, Rosemarie mentored Michelle with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. She taught her how to structure trusts that couldn't be traced, how to read SEC filings for hidden opportunities, how to dress just well enough to be professional but forgettable, how to speak in meetings so people heard competence but not threat. Michelle became Rosemarie's shadow, learning the business from the inside while working publicly as a mid-level analyst at Whitmore. In private, she was learning to run an empire. When Rosemarie was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2016, she had 6 months to live and a decision to make about her legacy. "I'm giving you Northbridge Holdings," Rosemarie told Michelle in her hospital room at Northwestern Memorial. "Controlling interest through a web of trusts you'll manage. Your name won't appear anywhere public. You'll be a ghost, just like I taught you." "Why me?" Michelle asked. "Because you understand what I understood. Power isn't about being seen. It's about being underestimated while holding all the cards." Rosemary died on a Tuesday morning in September 2016. Michelle Johnson, then 36 years old, became the majority shareholder of a $3.4 billion private investment group that almost no one knew she controlled, and she intended to keep it that way. Michelle met Lewis Johnson at a tech conference in Las Vegas in March 2017, 6 months after Rosemary's death. She'd been attending a panel on emerging market opportunities, taking notes in a worn notebook while wearing a JCPenney blazer worth $89, when a man with a movie star smile sat down next to her during the break. "Let me guess," he said, flashing perfect teeth. "You're in analytics. Market research, maybe? You have that look about you. Smart, focused, not here for the cocktail parties." "Project management," Michelle said, the cover story rolling off her tongue easily now. "Mid-level work. Nothing exciting. I'm Lewis, business development at Apex Ventures in LA. Definitely here for the cocktail parties." He was handsome in that effortless California way, with dark skin that glowed with health, eyes that actually seemed interested when she spoke, and an energy that filled whatever room he entered. He made Michelle laugh, with stories about disastrous pitch meetings and tech bros who couldn't code. He asked about her work with genuine curiosity, never once making her feel boring or plain. Over drinks that evening, he told her he made around $115,000 a year, had $68,000 in student loans from USC, and was tired of the shallow dating scene in Los Angeles, where women only cared about follower counts and Tesla models. "You're refreshing," Lewis said, ordering them both another round. "You're just real. No pretense. No games." Michelle smiled. If he only knew. They dated long distance for 8 months. Lewis visited Chicago. Michelle flew to Los Angeles. He loved that she was low maintenance, that she didn't demand expensive restaurants or designer gifts, that she seemed genuinely happy eating pizza on his couch while he practiced pitch presentations. What Lewis never questioned was how a project manager making $70,000 could afford frequent flights to California, or how she always seemed to know which companies were about to get acquired, or how doors opened for him right after he mentioned opportunities to Michelle in casual conversation. They married in April 2018 at a small lakefront ceremony in Chicago with 40 guests. Michelle wore a dress that cost $890. Lewis cried during his vows. They honeymooned in Door County, Wisconsin, staying at a bed and breakfast that cost $180 a night. The first year was good. Michelle quietly paid off Lewis's student loans as a wedding gift, calling it money she'd saved. She helped him prepare for interviews when he decided to leave Apex Ventures. When he landed a position at Meridian West Capital in Los Angeles, she moved without complaint, setting up a home office in their Pasadena house while he started climbing. Then, 3 years into their marriage, Lewis met Vanessa Clark. Vanessa was 29, brilliant, ambitious, and stunning in a way that made people stop mid-sentence. She wore Louboutin heels to Monday meetings and closed deals with venture capitalists over champagne at Soho House. Lewis started working late, attending industry events. Michelle was suddenly too busy to join, talking about Vanessa's insights with an admiration that felt different from professional respect. Michelle watched her husband transform. The man who'd loved her realness started making comments about her appearance, suggesting she might try a new gym or wear something more polished to company functions. He stopped asking about her work, started introducing her as my wife, she's in operations, with a tone that suggested apology. At a Meridian holiday party in December 2022, Michelle overheard two executives talking by the bar. Lewis is going places. Shame about the wife, though. Doesn't exactly fit the image. Vanessa Clark fits the image. Everyone knows they're together. Michelle had smiled, refilled her wine glass, and said nothing. Being underestimated was power, after all. The crack that shattered everything happened on a Thursday evening in May 2023, 18 months before the wine would drip down Michelle's face at the Westmont Grand. Lewis had mentioned a client dinner that would run late. Michelle had nodded, kissed his cheek, and returned to analyzing a pharmaceutical acquisition opportunity in her home office. But around 8:30 p.m., she remembered Lewis had left his anniversary cufflinks at his office, the ones she'd given him for their 5th year. She decided to surprise him, maybe drop them off, maybe steal a moment of the connection they'd once had. She drove to Meridian West Capital's headquarters in Century City, parked in visitor parking, and took the elevator to the executive floor. The offices were mostly dark, except for a few conference rooms. She was heading toward Lewis's office when she heard voices drifting from the rooftop terrace, where executives sometimes held informal meetings with the Los Angeles skyline as backdrop. Lewis's laugh, Vanessa's voice, the clink of champagne glasses. Michelle stopped in the stairwell, hand on the door handle. "Honestly, she thinks I'm crazy," Vanessa was saying, "but I'm telling you, this $800 million deal is going to change everything. Once it closes and Lewis's bonuses vest, we're moving forward with Phase 2. Phase 2. Lewis repeated it like a promise. "God, I can't wait to stop pretending. 7 years of playing the supportive husband to someone who doesn't even understand what I do." "Is she really that clueless?" Vanessa asked. "Michelle? She's sweet, genuinely sweet, but she's soft, grateful for everything. She'll sign whatever papers my attorney puts in front of her and disappear back to Chicago to live her quiet little life. She's too fragile to fight, too naive to see it coming." Michelle's hand tightened on the door handle, her wedding ring pressed into her palm. "And the settlement?" Vanessa asked. "California's community property, so she's technically entitled to half of marital assets, but her income has been basically nothing this whole time. My attorney thinks we can argue my success was entirely my own effort. Keep her exposure to maybe $400,000, $500,000 tops. She'll take it. She always takes what she's given." They laughed. The sound echoed across the terrace. "Poor thing," Vanessa said, though she didn't sound sympathetic at all. "She really has no idea who you are now, who we're about to become. The moment this deal closes, I'm filing. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Let her have one last nice Christmas, then we move on with our actual lives." Michelle stood in that stairwell for another 10 minutes, listening to them plan her discarding like she was furniture being donated to Goodwill. She heard Lewis describe their marriage as starter practice, heard Vanessa joke about Michelle's weight, her plain clothes, her lack of sophistication. When they finally went back inside, Michelle walked quietly back to her car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the steering wheel. She didn't cry. Crying was for people who'd been blindsided. Michelle had been raised by a woman who'd survived abandonment and poverty through pure calculation. She'd been mentored by a billionaire who'd built an empire by being underestimated. She understood exactly what was happening, and more importantly, she understood exactly what to do about it. She drove home, walked into her office, and opened a new spreadsheet file. At the top she typed, "Project Lewis, timeline to execution." Then she started planning. Michelle called Kendra Cook at 6:47 a.m., the morning after the rooftop terrace. Before Lewis woke up, before she had to see his face across the breakfast table and pretend everything was normal. "I need you to design something elegant." Michelle told her chief counsel. A contract clause that will destroy two people who think they're untouchable, but make it look so standard that their attorneys sign off without question. Kendra had worked for Rosemary Carter for 15 years before Michelle inherited the empire. She understood exactly what elegant meant in this context. What's the trigger? Kendra asked. Humiliating or harassing conduct at official company events, Michelle said. Any executive who engages in behavior that reflects poorly on organizational integrity forfeits all bonuses and equity tied to the deal. That's brutal and brilliant. What's the target? My husband Lewis Johnson. He's lead dealmaker at Meridian West Capital, and his mistress Vanessa Clark, senior analyst. They're planning to divorce me the moment their bonuses vest from the acquisition they're celebrating. There was a pause on the line. Then Kendra said, "Tell me everything." Over the next 3 hours, Michelle laid out the entire plan. Northbridge Holdings would acquire Meridian's target company, a mid-sized tech firm called Vertex Solutions that Lewis had been pursuing for 8 months. Michelle had already run the analysis. Vertex was undervalued, well-managed, and a genuinely smart investment. The fact that acquiring it would give her husband the biggest win of his career was just convenient timing. The acquisition contract would be 922 pages long, dense with legal terminology, standard clauses about executive retention, non-compete agreements, and performance benchmarks. Buried on page 713, in subsection 12, 4C under Organizational Integrity Standards, would be the Northbridge loyalty provision. We need Lewis and Vanessa classified as primary executives, Michelle said. That makes them fully subject to the provision. That won't be hard, Kendra replied. Lewis is the lead dealmaker. Vanessa's the primary analyst. Standard integration protocol would classify them as key personnel anyway. And the forfeiture amounts? Kendra pulled up Lewis's compensation structure. His deal bonus is $6.7 million. Stock options, another $3.2 million, vested over 3 years. Vanessa's bonus is $8.4 million. Options worth $14 million. Total exposure, if they trigger the clause, $32.3 million. Michelle smiled coldly. Perfect. Now we need to make sure they trigger it. You can't force them to violate the clause, Kendra warned. That's entrapment. I don't need to force them, Michelle said. I just need to create the opportunity and let their arrogance do the rest. Over the following 14 months, Michelle orchestrated everything from the shadows. She quietly persuaded Northbridge's board that Vertex Solutions was the perfect acquisition target, presenting analysis that Lewis himself had prepared and shared with her over dinner months earlier, back when he still pretended to value her input. She ensured that Meridian West Capital was brought in as the intermediary firm, giving Lewis the lead role he'd been angling for. She watched him take credit for discovering the opportunity, watched him present strategies she'd helped him develop, watched him celebrate milestones he couldn't have reached without doors she'd opened anonymously. And she watched him fall deeper into his relationship with Vanessa, watched them become careless, confident, publicly affectionate, in ways that made industry insiders whisper but never quite loud enough for consequences. They're planning something big for the signing ceremony, Kendra told Michelle in October 2024, 3 weeks before the deal would close. Lewis told the event coordinator he wants a memorable moment during the celebration, something that establishes his position as a major player. Let him plan whatever he wants, Michelle said. Just make sure we have cameras covering every angle. The signing ceremony was scheduled for November 18, 2024, at the Westmont Grand Hotel. Michelle bought a simple navy dress from Macy's for $67. She practiced standing still while imagining wine poured over her head. She rehearsed the perfect expression of humiliation, the exact posture of a woman who'd been publicly broken. "Are you sure about this?" Kendra asked 2 days before the event. "Once they humiliate you publicly, there's no taking it back. People will remember that image." "Good," Michelle said. "Let them remember. Let every executive in that room see exactly what Lewis and Vanessa think they can get away with. Because 3 days later, in a boardroom at Northbridge Holdings, I'm going to show them the cost of underestimating someone." The night before the signing, Lewis practiced his speech in their bedroom mirror. Michelle watched from the doorway, invisible as always. "This is it," Lewis said to his reflection, not even noticing her. "The moment everything changes. After tomorrow, I'm not just another deal maker. I'm the guy who closed $800 million." Michelle said nothing, but in her mind, she was already 3 days ahead, already sitting in that boardroom, already watching the moment Lewis's face went white as he realized the woman he'd dismissed owned everything he thought he'd won. Tomorrow, he would pour wine on her head. By next week, he'd realize he'd just forfeited $32.3 million, and the woman he'd called too fragile to fight would finally step out of the shadows and destroy him with a clause he'd signed himself. The integration meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on November 21st, 3 days after Lewis and Vanessa poured wine over Michelle's head in front of 300 witnesses. Michelle arrived at Northbridge Holdings Century City headquarters at 8:30 a.m., using the private executive elevator that required a biometric scan. She'd never brought Lewis here in 7 years of marriage. He didn't even know Northbridge had offices in this building. Today she wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit worth $4,800, Manolo Blahnik heels worth $1,200, and her grandmother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry her mother had kept after her father left. Her red hair, which still held faint wine stains despite 2 professional treatments, was pulled back in a severe bun. She looked exactly like what she was, someone who controlled billions. Chairman Patel was already in the boardroom reviewing the presentation. He was 67, a former Goldman Sachs executive who joined Northbridge's board when Rosemarie was still alive. He was one of 7 people who knew Michelle's true position. "They have no idea," he said, not quite asking. "None," Michelle confirmed. "Lewis thinks I work for a mid-level analytics firm making $72,000. He's never asked for details." "And you want to do this publicly? In front of the entire Meridian executive team? I want them to understand what happens when you humiliate someone at a corporate event," Michelle said coldly. "That's what the loyalty provision exists for, after all. Organizational integrity." At 9:55 a.m., the Meridian West Capital executives began arriving. Michelle watched them on the security monitors from the adjacent conference room. Lewis wore his victory suit, the navy Armani he saved for important meetings. Vanessa wore a crimson dress that probably cost more than Michelle's old car, her hair perfect, her confidence absolute. They walked into the boardroom laughing about something, and Michelle felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just cold clarity. At exactly 10 a.m., Michelle entered through the main doors and took a seat at the far end of the table, away from the board members. She looked small, diminished, exactly like the overlooked wife everyone had seen humiliated 3 days ago. Lewis glanced at her, frowned slightly, then looked at Chairman Patel. "I'm sorry, I wasn't aware spouses were invited to integration meetings." "She's not here as anyone's spouse," Patel said calmly. "Please, everyone take your seats. We have a lot to cover." Vanessa whispered something to Lewis. They both smirked. Michelle saw it, noted it, felt nothing. Patel began with standard integration protocol, reviewing timelines and reporting structures. 15 minutes of corporate procedure while Lewis checked his phone and Vanessa took notes on her iPad. Then Patel paused, looked directly at Michelle, and said the words she'd been waiting 18 months to hear. Before we continue, our controlling shareholder has asked to address the group. For those who don't know her, I'd like to introduce Michelle Johnson, majority owner of Northbridge Holdings. The room went absolutely silent. Lewis's head snapped up. Vanessa's pen stopped mid-word. Every Meridian executive froze. Michelle stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked to the front of the room. A slide appeared on the screen behind her, the Northbridge Holdings ownership structure, showing her name at the top of the cap table. 61% controlling interest held through 3 blind trusts. Total portfolio value, $3.4 billion. "Good morning," Michelle said, her voice steady. "I apologize for the confusion. I prefer to keep my business interests private, which is why many of you may not have realized who owns the company that just acquired your firm." Lewis's face had gone completely white. "Michelle, what? Let me finish, please," she said, not looking at him. Another slide appeared, showing the signing ceremony 3 days ago. The moment frozen on screen. Vanessa lifting the wine glass, Lewis laughing, Michelle standing there, soaked and humiliated. This footage was taken at the deal signing ceremony on November 18th. Michelle continued, "At what I'm told was meant to be a memorable moment, establishing corporate hierarchy. Unfortunately for some of you, it was memorable for the wrong reasons." She advanced to the next slide. The Northbridge Loyalty Provision, page 713, subsection 12, 4C, highlighted in red. This clause, which every Meridian executive signed as part of the acquisition agreement, states that any primary executive who engages in humiliating or harassing conduct at official company events forfeits all bonuses and equity tied to this deal. The signing ceremony qualified as an official corporate event. The conduct captured on video qualifies as humiliating. Vanessa made a sound like she'd been punched. "As primary executives," Michelle continued, "Lewis Johnson and Vanessa Clark are subject to this provision. As of this morning, their combined forfeiture totals $32.3 million, which reverts to Northbridge Holdings." "You can't," Lewis started. "I can," Michelle said simply. "You signed the contract. Your attorneys reviewed it. The provision is legally binding, and the conduct was witnessed by 300 people, many of whom have already been interviewed by our legal team." She finally looked directly at her husband. "You wanted a memorable moment, Lewis. Congratulations." The boardroom cleared in under 3 minutes. The other Meridian executives fled like the room was on fire, sensing correctly that whatever happened next wasn't meant for witnesses. Chairman Patel excused himself diplomatically. Vanessa stumbled out without speaking, her face the color of paper. Lewis remained frozen in his chair, staring at Michelle like she was a stranger, which, she supposed, she was. "My office," Michelle said. "Now." She led him to the executive elevator, inserted her keycard, and rode 42 floors up in complete silence. Her corner office occupied the entire southeast corner of the building, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Los Angeles, custom furniture worth more than the house they shared in Pasadena. Lewis walked in like he was entering a dream or a nightmare. "How long?" he managed, finally. "Have I owned Northbridge? Since 2016? Have I been planning this specific revenge? 18 months? Ever since I heard you and Vanessa on the rooftop terrace, planning to divorce me for crumbs. You were there? I was there." Michelle pulled out her phone, opened a recording app, and pressed play. Lewis's voice filled the office. She's soft, grateful for everything. She'll sign whatever papers my attorney puts in front of her and disappear back to Chicago. She's too fragile to fight, too naive to see it coming. Vanessa's laughter. Poor thing. She really has no idea who you are now. Lewis's face went from white to gray. You recorded us. California is a two-party consent state for recordings, so this wouldn't be admissible in court, Michelle said. But I don't need it for court. I needed it for clarity. To remind myself when I felt guilty that you weren't the man I married anymore. That you'd become someone who'd mock his wife's body, plan her disposal like a business transaction, and humiliate her publicly because you thought she couldn't fight back. She stopped the recording, sat down at her desk. Lewis remained standing, swaying slightly. I'm filing for divorce today, Michelle continued calmly. Under California community property law, you're technically entitled to half of all assets acquired during our marriage. My Northbridge ownership predates our wedding, but the appreciation during our 7 years together, approximately $254 million in increased value, is community property. Your fair share would be $127 million. Lewis's eyes went wide. For a moment she saw hope flicker across his face, greed calculating possibilities. However, Michelle continued, fighting for that money means exposing everything. The adultery with Vanessa, documented by multiple witnesses and photographs. The workplace harassment, which violates Meridian's ethics policies. The footage of you pouring wine on me at a corporate event which has already cost you $6.7 million and Vanessa $14 million. Every detail will become public record. Every executive in this industry will know exactly who you are. She opened a folder on her desk. I'm offering you $190,000. It's what I estimate you would have offered me if our positions were reversed, if you still thought I was worth basically nothing. Take it and sign the papers quietly, or spend the next 3 years in court destroying what's left of your reputation while I make sure every judge, every mediator, and every journalist knows exactly how you treated your wife. This is extortion, Lewis said, but his voice had no strength behind it. No, extortion would be threatening to release information unless you pay me. I'm offering you money to go away quietly. There's a difference. She slid the settlement papers across the desk. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, the offer drops to $90,000. Why are you doing this? Lewis's voice cracked. If you were this wealthy all along, why not just tell me? Why let me humiliate you? Michelle finished. Because you needed to learn what it feels like to be dismissed, to be treated like you're worthless, to have someone you love look at you and see nothing but an embarrassing burden. She stood up, walked to the window. The city stretched out below them, thousands of lives playing out in buildings just like this one. I loved you, Lewis. I would have given you anything. Not because you earned it, but because that's what you do for the person you build a life with. But you looked at me and saw dead weight. You heard project manager and decided I wasn't worth your time anymore. So yes, I set this up. I let you sign that contract. I let you humiliate me because I needed to know if there was any part of the man I married left inside you. She turned back to face him. And you know what I see right now? I don't see remorse. I see you calculating whether you can still get that $127 million. I see you wondering if you can spin this to your friends, make yourself the victim. So no, Lewis, you don't get the money you would have had if you'd just been a decent husband. You get exactly what you planned to give me. Lewis walked to the door, then stopped. I did love you. Once. I know, Michelle said. But love without respect is worthless. And you stopped respecting me the moment you decided I didn't fit your new image. The door closed behind him. Michelle stood alone in her office, looking out at Los Angeles, and felt the weight of 18 months of planning finally lift from her shoulders. It was over, and she was free. Lewis chose war. He rejected Michelle's settlement offer and hired Howard Finch, a $850 an hour divorce attorney, famous for squeezing money from wealthy spouses. Finch filed papers demanding $150 million, claiming Lewis had been instrumental to Michelle's success, that he'd provided emotional support and professional guidance that enabled her wealth accumulation. It was absurd. It was also public record. The filing leaked within 48 hours. A paralegal at Finch's firm sold screenshots to a legal gossip blog, and by the next morning, finance Twitter was dissecting every detail. Someone found the footage from the signing ceremony, the moment Lewis and Vanessa poured wine over Michelle's head, and it went viral. CEO's husband humiliates wife at $800M deal signing, then demands $150M in divorce. Read the headline on Business Insider. The story ran everywhere. Bloomberg, Forbes, Wall Street Journal. The comment sections were brutal. Imagine pouring wine on your wife and then demanding half her billions. This man lost $6.7M because he couldn't resist humiliating her publicly. Now he wants $150M. The audacity. She owned the company the whole time and he didn't even know. That's not a marriage. That's a long con. Meridian West Capital quietly let Lewis go 2 weeks later. Not fired officially, just a mutual separation agreement that paid out his base salary but nothing more. His professional reputation was toxic. No firm wanted the guy who'd become a meme for humiliating his secretly billionaire wife. Vanessa disappeared faster. She resigned from Meridian the day after the Boardroom reveal, moved to New York, and tried reinventing herself at a smaller investment firm. But board positions she'd been courting dried up. Speaking invitations got canceled. The finance world had long memories for public embarrassment, especially when it cost you $14 million in forfeited equity. The divorce proceedings dragged for 22 months. Lewis's attorney tried everything, claiming Michelle had deceived him about her wealth, arguing her success stemmed from his emotional labor, demanding access to Northbridge's private investment records. Judges shot down every motion. California community property law was clear, and Michelle's attorneys, led by Kendra Cook's firm at $980 an hour, were relentless. In the end, Lewis settled for $90,000 and a 2019 BMW 3 Series he couldn't afford to maintain. The car needed $3,400 in repairs within 6 months. He couldn't pay for them. By March 2027, Lewis was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Bakersfield, working as a consultant for a small regional firm that paid $85,000 annually. He'd lost everything: the career, the reputation, the money he thought he'd secured. But mostly he'd lost the life he could have had with a woman who would have given him anything if he'd just treated her with basic respect. Michelle moved back to Chicago in the summer of 2026. She donated the $32.3 million Lewis and Vanessa forfeited to establish the Rosemarie Carter Scholarship Fund, providing full rides to Northwestern University for girls from the South Side who understood that being overlooked was sometimes the greatest advantage of all. She met Daniel Torres at a community garden in Lincoln Park on a Saturday morning in October. He was an architect earning $94,000 a year, designing affordable housing projects, and he thought she was just another volunteer who liked getting her hands dirty with soil and tomato plants. "You're good at this," Daniel said, watching her calculate optimal spacing for winter vegetables. "I like systems that make sense," Michelle replied. "Plant this here, water at this time, get predictable results. Unlike people?" Exactly unlike people. They dated for 8 months before Michelle told him about Northbridge Holdings. She'd learned her lesson about secrets. "Wait, you're that Michelle Johnson?" Daniel said, pulling up a Forbes article on his phone. "The private equity billionaire? And you've been spending Saturdays teaching kids how to compost? Is that a problem?" "Only if you expect me to start wearing expensive suits. I'm pretty committed to these $40 jeans." They married in April 2028 at the Chicago Botanic Garden with 60 guests and a reception that cost $12,000 because Daniel insisted anything more was wasteful. Michelle had never been happier. In September 2029, Lewis saw her photo in Fortune magazine, "The Invisible Empire." How Michelle Johnson built billions while everyone was looking elsewhere. The photo showed her laughing with Daniel in their Lincoln Park garden, dirt under her fingernails, genuinely joyful. Lewis was sitting in his Bakersfield apartment when he saw it, eating microwave dinner because he couldn't afford restaurants anymore. He stared at that photo for 20 minutes, understanding finally what he'd actually lost. Not the money, not even the career. He'd lost the woman who'd loved him before the corner office and the fancy title, the partner who'd opened doors without asking for credit, the wife who'd celebrated his success even while he dismissed her worth. He'd had everything a brilliant woman who would have given him the world, and he'd thrown it away because she didn't fit the image he wanted to project. The math was simple, Lewis realized. He'd gained nothing and lost everything that actually mattered. Michelle never thought about Lewis anymore. Sometimes Daniel would find her in their home office late at night, reviewing investment opportunities, and ask if she ever regretted the revenge. "No," she'd say honestly. "I regret the years I wasted loving someone who didn't value me, but teaching him the cost of that mistake, that I don't regret at all." Because the real lesson wasn't about money or contracts or corporate clauses buried on page 713. It was simpler than that. When you treat people like they're worthless, eventually they'll show you exactly what you lost. And by then, it's too late to calculate the cost. If you enjoyed this story of ruthless corporate revenge and poetic justice, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in Michelle's position, and let me know where you're watching from. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.